Hey guys, Ryan Lutz here. Today I want to demonstrate how I tear apart my front clips when I'm rebuilding them for a race. So I've already cleaned it off. Nice long bristle brush, just clean off all the excess dirt. I like to use end dust as kind of like my preferred. I spray it on really quick and then just wipe off the dirt, and use a microfiber to kind of dry it off. And that gets it looking kind of like you see here. Looks pretty good. So now I will make sure that everything driveline wise is working well. So I look at my drive shafts, make sure they're all spinning smoothly, make sure the driveline's spinning smooth and free, nothing's bent, make sure all the links are articulating properly, including the sway bar links. If any of that happened to be too tight, what I like to do, say this link was too tight, I take some pliers and I kind of pinch on either end of the plastic and just give it a little pinch in a couple spots, and that'll help free it up and allow it to articulate a lot easier. So you want all that stuff to be free. Also, I make sure that the hopefully hinge pins aren't bent, just checking all that, all the motions there, and then I'm ready to start tearing it apart. So I'll first take off the sway bar links, and if you notice how I have them, how I put them on, I make it so I always have access. Sometimes if you put the sway bar on last and you've already had it mounted here, your set screw access could actually be like having to go through one of your upper links or something, and then it gets hard to access and you can't work on your cars easily. So by making sure you put them together, that's one of the last things you put together. That way you can put the set screw exactly where you need it to be able to take it apart easily the next time. So then I take off the A block. Make sure I try to keep the pills in the correct orientation so I remember where to put them next time. As I take out each hinge pin, I'll kind of give it a spin to make sure it spins freely and it doesn't feel like I have a high spot or a bent spot in it. So there you go. This one actually feels like it might have a bent spot, or potentially this arm just needs cleaned out a little bit. So I actually have a chainsaw file that I use. Also, you could do a 4mm arm reamer. This is a 4mm chainsaw file. So I just run that through the arm really quick, clean it out, and then I can also wipe off that. You can see I have some extra greases or oil that got onto the hinge pin. And I can run it through again. Yep, there's actually a sticky spot as I spin it around, so this will be a hinge pin that I actually replace. So there we have that. So then I'll get into my diff access. Take off the diff cover. Out pops the diff. Now I'll examine the diff, make sure that the bearings are still spinning nice and free, meaning they didn't get any extra oil in them from a leaky diff or anything. These new Agama diff cases don't really leak at all, so they've been really good in that regards. So then I'll set this aside, I'll take this apart. There's a whole nother video on rebuilding your diff. Feel free to watch that. I'll have that linked in the comments, or sorry, in the description of this video. So then I will check my drive line on either side, either my CVs or my unis. In this case I got CVs on here. So quickly pull that apart. I'll tear it all the way down and wipe it all out to clean it all up. Clean off the inside. I'll examine my dog bone here, make sure that it's not too worn here. If you start to get a notch in this, you probably want to replace it, because as your car goes through the suspension travel, and or if you're turning, you know, that pin's moving, this pin's moving in here. If you have a notch and it catches on that, that creates a bind point, and so your suspension's not going to work freely. You're going to feel like inconsistencies while you're running. So that's something to look out for. But all mine's still pretty fresh, so I'm just going to kind of wipe it all off and make sure that the ball spins freely in here. Now say that this was catching. Sometimes this will feel rough when you're doing this, and it's because this is starting to wear out here. What you can do is take a Dremel sanding drum and kind of just scuff the outside of that. you can see it. Got a little bit of a silver tinge to it, and that can take off any burrs that you have, and it should make this spin freer. So there's a little tip for that. And then if you have, more than one set of holes here, you could use the opposite set if one's wearing out to try to tighten everything up again. And it all feels pretty tight, pretty good. So I'll pop out the bearings right quick. Hopefully, sometimes they stick a little bit. So I'm just using a 2.5 to kind of get on the inner race of it. I'm pushing from either side to kind of push it out evenly, back and forth, back and forth. And I'll just check the action of the bearing. Kind of wipe it off really quick. Maybe for the other one I could use a 5.5 driver to have a little bit better coverage on it. And if they're sticky at all, you can use a little bit more force, or sometimes you even have to get out the big guns. Hammer time. Pound it out. So what you want to do though is whenever you do that kind of thing is make sure that your tool is on the inner race. That's kind of where your best support is. If you have, say you're using a 1.5 for some reason and your tool's out here in the middle, or if you had a rubber seal bearing, you could puncture it and seize up the bearing, and you don't want that. So you want to try to make sure you're always hitting that inner race. But both bearings feel good. So then I would reassemble it. Bearing on there. Since this one goes through the caster block, oops, it doesn't slide through the caster block, so I've got to kind of set the bearing in there first. Then push the CV through, the axle through, kind of line up the bearings. Got a good push, and since these were a little tight to come out, I might have to help it out a little bit to push it in as well. So I'll try to make sure the shaft is straight. I got this tool that has a, this flat part here that I can kind of pound on it. Make sure it's all the way in. Now you'll figure that out if you don't notice it right away when you go to put it all back together out here. If this pin is really hard to push in, you know that your bearings aren't seated fully yet. So, and that might be my case still. So I need to push it still a little bit further. That's good. I got to actually demonstrate what might happen. So see, there, that time the pin went through. And make sure it spins freely, feels smooth. Tighten it back up. Okay, and repeat on the other side. And then if I want to check my pinion bearings, I can do one of two things. I can either take this off here to give easier access, or I can still get to it here. So, crack that loose. Push out the pinion. Pop out the bearings, same thing. Make sure you're hitting that inner race. Okay, and wiping off the bearings. Making sure they feel good. Both still feel good. And this is an important part. Those bearings take a lot of load, so you really want to make sure that they are good. And there's a failure point that you see quite often. Somebody's diff will blow up, and it's because one of these bearings has seized or failed on them. So you definitely don't want that to happen to you. So better to replace a bearing than having to replace all your diff gears and everything else. So I'll examine the pinion gear, wipe off the greases, make sure all the teeth look good on it, no chips or anything. set that back in. And then I'm going to re-Loctite this, because this is a critical thing that can fall out. Now make sure that the end of your set screw is flat, so you can use a Dremel for that. And then I'll get a little bit of Loctite. I'll put some Loctite on both the set screw and in the threads. Now if your parts are brand new, they might have some oil from the factory on them, so it's a good practice to use motor spray or brake cleaner, something to really clean the set screw, really clean the threads inside your coupler here. So then I will set that on the pinion, and I'm pushing very lightly with my thumb just to hold it in place. I don't want to put full pressure on this. I'm also holding the pinion on my other finger. So I snug it up lightly, make sure it spins freely, make sure I have at most a tick of play back and forth, and then I go in for the kill. Do about a 10-second hold on this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay, I do that. These things have come off on me in the past, and that's just one way that I found that it keeps it from happening, and it works really well for me. So since everything is working free, the steering action was smooth. You know, if I really wanted to go into it, if I was at a really dirty track or whatnot, I could take off these steering posts and clean out these bearings as well, but the track I was at wasn't that dirty. So that should be okay for this race for me. And at this point, I would have my rebuilt diff, put it in and rebuild it. I'll show you that in just a second. Alright, after you got your diff all rebuilt, ready to go, then you can put a little bit of some grease around the gears. I use the ProTech Premier White gear grease. Drop that in, make sure it spins freely, drop on the cover, tighten it up. Okay. Next I will drop in my hinge pins. And if anybody's curious, this is just a spacer. We are able to move our front arms about 2 millimeter on the Agama cars, forward or back. So right now I have mine in the back position. Generally it's going to put a little bit more weight over the front tires and give a little bit more steering, a little bit shorter wheelbase as well. So put the drive shafts in the out drives, make sure that my sway bar is free and not stuck underneath the drive shafts. Make sure my my A block pills have stayed in. Make sure they're not worn out as well. And tighten up the lock screws. And now for the sway bar ones, and I can demonstrate how I make sure that put my set screw, and I try to do them both the exact same, so I'm able, even with the front end fully built, I'm able to access that screw head, so I can change it if need be during a race, and it's not, say, like underneath or anything crazy. And then also make sure your sway bar is set even on both sides, however you end up doing it. If you tighten it up a little bit, it kind of affects about like having a little bit heavier sway bar. If you put it more towards the outside of it, it can make it feel like a slightly lighter sway bar. And then just make sure everything is free, all working good. And that's how I build my front clip and ready to throw it on the car and go out there and have some fun. So thanks for watching, guys. We'll catch you in the next one.